Hi everyone, Silva here. Following the release of our Alessi Bias Dress, we wanted to do a short tutorial to help you achieve a perfect neckline. Here we go step by step.
Just before we start the video, I thought it'd be really good to mention about the tearaway violine that we sell. It's specifically used for this purpose and in the garment industry for stabilizing necklines, armholes, waistbands, etc. And it's a particular thickness that's really easy to tear away, so that when you are tearing it away on delicate fabrics, it's not putting too much pressure on the garment. So you might find products that look similar in other stores, but it's a lot thicker and a lot harder to tear away. So make sure when using a violine, tear away that it's this particular weight that tears away easily, and we'll show you that later on in the video. So as per the instructions for the Alessi Bias Dress, we're going to have you crimp stitch the neckline. And why we have done that, the violine shields have been purposefully cut a little bit smaller than the neckline. Normally these violine shields are cut exactly to the neckline, but we're going to have you crimp stitch, which is to reduce this area a little bit to fit this smaller violine shield. And the reason for this is so that you end up with a neckline that sits flat against the body and doesn't gape. So with the pad of your finger, you will collect the fabric, and then when there's too much fabric, let it go, and then continue all the way around the neckline. And do the same on front and back. So we've crimp stitched around the necklines. Now it's time to pin the violine shields to the right side of your front and back, but in this case we're just showing the front. So first off, pin and line up your center front, and then line up your shoulders, and then ease pin in between. And you'll see that the violine shield fits perfectly now as we've eased in that neckline to fit the violine shield. So now we're going to sew the violine shield on by taking 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, so essentially in between where you've crimp stitched previously. So we've got the neck violine shield sewn to the front and also to the back neckline. Now it's time to join the front and back together with right sides. Join them at the shoulders. So we've got front and back joined together at the shoulders. Overlock the seam and press towards the back. Now it's time to attach the bias binding strip. We're going to pin right side of the bias strip to the wrong side of the neckline. Okay, so we're going to attach the right side to the wrong side of the neckline, as we've instructed in a blog post on how to join binding to a neckline or armhole. You start off pinning an angled end of your binding 1/2 inch in, somewhere near the back seam. So not on top of the bulky seam, but somewhere close to it, and preferably towards the back. So as you're pinning, just have a bit more tension on those tighter curved areas on the neckline. Just slight tension on the binding. Less stretching of the binding at the center front and center back of your neckline. To find the right spot to join your binding, that pin mark that marks the 1/2 inch, which essentially will be the 1/4 inch for this side and the 1/4 inch for this end, you line up. When you get to the binding that meets with this pin, place a pin there to mark that point, and then cut along the same grain angle. And again here with the linen we can see that, so that'll be our mark to cut the end of the binding. So in order to join the ends together, we've unpinned the pins that were at the start, and we've got the ends of the binding running in the same angle. So with right sides together, we're going to join the binding. We've got to have a seam allowance of 1/4 inch, so there'll be a little overlap on each end because of the angled ends. And put a pin to mark your 1/4 inch seam allowance to join the ends together. So we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance across there. So we've got the ends joined, and you can finger press the seam allowance open with your fingers and then cut off the little ears that are exposed past the edge of the binding, so that when you turn the binding over it's all lined up. And then we'll repin the binding back to the rest of the neckline, ready to sew the 1/4 inch around the neckline. So we've got the rest of the neckline binding pinned, and here's our join with the seam allowance pressed open. Now we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance around the neckline. So we've sewn the binding to the neckline. Now it's time to tear away the violine shields, and if you've got the right weight tear away, it should tear away very easily, perforated at that seam line. Now we're going to push, using our fingers, the binding away from the wrong side. Don't press this with the iron, just do this with your hands. It's a lot gentler. We then turn it over to the right side, and we're going to bring in the raw edge of the binding down to meet the raw edge of the seam allowance around the neckline, and then fold it over towards the front, covering the stitching line and pinning it in this direction. So continue that all the way round to evenly pin your binding in place. Making sure to cover the stitching line. So we've got the binding pinned in place to the right side of the garment. Now we're going to edge stitch this folded edge of the binding in place. We'll start at a shoulder seam and edge stitch along that folded edge all the way around.
I have now gently pressed it, and now your neckline is finished. As you can see, it's sitting nice and flat and it won't gape. Hope this video was helpful. Happy sewing!